And I've got Alan Shipnuck. He has been covering golf for 25 plus years for Sports Illustrated. He has written another book, and I think this is 8 books that he's written. It's called Phil, the Rip Roarin', an unauthorized biography of golf's most colorful superstar. Available online wherever books are sold. Alan, good to talk to you again. When's the last time you spoke to Phil Mickelson?
Well, it was earlier this year. Even after we had our fraught phone call around Thanksgiving, where he told me all his secrets about Saudi Arabia, we were still in contact. Phil was up at the Yellowstone Club skiing, and Phil never opens his mouth without an agenda. So he's continuing to try to sort of work the angles and influence myself and other reporters on Saudi Arabia and some other things involving the tour. So we haven't spoken since February for sure, though.
Okay, it's unauthorized, but Phil still cooperated to do an interview. Did he know what the interview was for when you sat down with him or spoke to him over Thanksgiving?
Yeah, it's been a whole journey, because I actually went to Phil 3 times going back to the 2020 PGA Championship and asked him to do interviews for the book. And over about a 5-month period, he mulled it over, and ultimately he said no, and which is his prerogative. And I've had so much access to Phil and the people around him for so many years that was fine. I just plunged into writing the book, and it was due December 1st. So a week before the book was due, it's basically done. At this point, I'm just adding another coat of polish. He decided to ring me up. And I think in the final analysis, he just couldn't help himself. It's been said many times about Phil is he has to be the smartest guy in the room. And it bothered him that he hadn't told me that he was smarter than Jay Monahan, the PGA Tour commissioner, and he was smarter than Greg Norman, the front man for the Saudi effort, and that he was working both sides of the street, and he had used all this leverage to get all these concessions he wanted. And so yeah, he called me, and I'm still somewhat baffled, but in the context of, Phil has spent his whole career sort of manipulating the media, and he never opens his mouth without an agenda. And I think in the end, he just couldn't help himself. He had to try and get in my ear one time before I actually sent the book in.
If he doesn't say this about the Saudis, what's the headline about this book?
That's a good question, because, I've often thought, like, maybe it would have been better if he hadn't called me, because it certainly has overshadowed a lot of the other material in the book, which, my goal was to write a really lively, fun, anecdotal, balanced look at a very complicated and contradictory character. And, I think I did that. Like I said, the book was done when he called me. And so there was already some juicy bits in there about his gambling, about the bust up with Bones, his career-long caddy, about Billy Walters. Like, there was already enough energy around this book that there would have been other headlines. But, certainly this Saudi stuff was going to blow no matter what. It was happening, and Phil was in the middle of it. So this was going to complicate his legacy either way. But what made our whole conversation so interesting, and I guess so fraught, is that, Phil said the quiet parts out loud. The golfers been going to Saudi Arabia and taking their money now for a long time. And if you stay on script, you can get away with it. And you say, I'm just here to grow the game, and I'm an athlete, not a politician. And everybody rolls their eyes. They know it's total BS, but you can get away with it. But Phil was the few, the rare athlete to actually acknowledge the Saudi atrocities, and yet he so callously dismissed them. And there was a shock value in those words. But I think ultimately what got him in trouble and sent him into this exile was that he admitted to, these sneaky backroom dealings where he was helping the Saudi tour actually get off the ground. And he was almost acting as a de facto playing commissioner. And in that scenario, he's actively subverting the interests of the PGA Tour. And so the words have gotten a lot of attention. It was really the actions is what got him in trouble with the tour and with his colleagues.
The gambling part, $40 million over a 4-year period. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's reporting from the book. And everyone's always known that Phil's a gambler. Like, it's been part of his brand. And when he's won, like when he cashed that Super Bowl ticket on the Ravens and made over $500,000, he loves to crow about it. But you also know there's been some heavy losses, because it showed up in court documents, in press clippings, and he's been linked to some shady characters through the years.
But is this casino gambling, Alan, or betting on games?
Mostly sports betting, but he does love baccarat and in the casinos, and he will go to the casino sports books. But it seems that it's mostly just making bets through bookies. And there was a whole controversy the month after the PGA Championship last year where Phil was linked to this mobbed up bookie in Detroit that bilked him out of $500,000, and Phil took umbrage to the Detroit newspaper bringing this to light, and threatened never to play in that tournament again. And so there's always been this low roar about Phil's gambling, but we didn't really know the numbers. And as part of this Billy Walters insider trading case, he was subject to this forensic audit.
Explain Billy Walters to the audience who's not
Oh
familiar.
yeah. Billy
Walters, if you can explain Billy Walters.
Yeah,
here.
yeah. I mean, that could be a long conversation. Billy Walters is this famous gambler, and in the 1980s, he was really the first guy to apply computer analysis to sports betting, and he started making money hand over fist. And he's also a legendary poker player. He's the kind of guy who'll walk into a casino and spend 36 hours playing roulette and walk out with $3 million, which he famously did years ago. And he just has an incredible mind for gambling. And because of all his activities, he's been subject to various indictments. He'd always beat the rap, which made him a folk hero in Las Vegas. And he also loves golf. He's played in PGA Tour Pro-Ams. He won the Crosby Clambake Pro-Am portion back in 2008. So he loves golf. He loves gambling. It was almost inevitable that him and Phil would cross paths, and they became friends. Billy became a mentor, and they became betting partners. And there's been a lot of confusion about the role between Phil and Billy, but Billy was not Phil's bookie. They were partners, and it was advantageous for both of them because Phil suddenly had access to the best mind in sports betting. And now Billy had access to the people that Phil would bet through, because Billy was often getting cut off from his own people because he was too good, and Phil was not too good. And over time, Phil would want to bet certain things that Billy thought were losers, but Billy would place the bet because he knew they were going to lose, and it would keep him in good graces with the bookies. And sometimes he'd front that money, and Phil ran up a tab essentially that ran into millions of dollars with Billy that he owed him. And so now Billy Walters also loved to play the stock market, as did Phil. Billy came into some information from involving Dean's Foods, just this random stock, but they were about to have a spinoff, and the price was going to spike. Billy made a big bet on this, and so did Phil. And the question has always been, what exactly did Billy tell Phil? And did Phil know that this information was tainted because it came from an insider at the company? And this exploded into a big SEC investigation. And Billy Walters wound up going down the river. He got jail time. He was convicted on all the charges. And Phil skated. Because of some very complex wrinkles in the law that I go into the book. I won't bore your listeners with now, but Phil was not charged, but he was named as a relief defendant, which means he benefited from this bad information. They couldn't prove he knew that it was bad, but he had to give them the money back. And ill-gotten gains is my new favorite term. So he had to give back over $1 million to the government. And Billy has never forgiven Phil because he feels like if Phil Mickelson had testified on his behalf, that would have helped Billy Walters, and he may not have gone to jail. That's subject to debate. But in Billy's mind, Phil sold him out, and so now Billy Walters is writing this his own book that's going to come out at the end of this year, early next year. Whereas my intention was to write a very fair and balanced look at Phil Mickelson. Billy Walters is not a trained journalist. He doesn't care about that. Like, he's got a vendetta, and he's out to get a scalp. And so Phil is rightfully worried about what Billy is going to put in his book, because Billy knows a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I was told, somebody who knows Billy, this is going to be a flamethrower. Like, he's coming after Phil. I don't know if it's called this or there's a chapter. It's called Now It's My Turn. And I think he's coming after Phil. We're talking Alan Shipnuck. He is a golf writer. The book is Phil, the Rip-Roaring and Unauthorized Biography of Golf's Most Colorful Superstar, available online wherever books are sold. I'm always curious why so many people love Phil Mickelson. What is the charm? What is the magic?
Well, it starts with he's an extrovert, whereas Tiger's an introvert. So at a tournament, Tiger has that 1,000-yard stare. He doesn't look anybody in the eye. He doesn't acknowledge their presence. It's almost like he's performing a solo in front of an empty theater, and he doesn't have to give anything more than that to the fans. You're just lucky to be watching him. And there's some truth to that, because he was so transcendent. And in late period Tiger, he's tried to give a little more back with the occasional nod, but it's very much he's playing in a bubble. But Phil loves the energy of the crowd, and he looks them in the eye. He gives the goofy thumbs up. He waves to them. He lets them in. and he's performing for them, and they feel that connection. And of course, Phil, has signed more autographs over the last 3 decades than probably any human on the planet. That's just part of his work day. It's like he's going to punch the clock. I'm going to go sign autographs for an hour. And whether it's shameless brand building or whether he really loves the fans almost doesn't matter, because the fans are still getting the autographs, are still getting that connection. He's joking with them. So it starts on a very human level. And then, whereas Tiger was this Terminator, this machine with this perfectly sculpted body, Phil has his flaws as a golfer, and it's a high wire act, and it was more fun to watch because you never knew when he was going to set himself on fire. And he looked like the fans. He was a little doughy, he was a little pudgy, his clothes didn't fit quite right. And I think that some fans just related more to Phil, even though he is this, transcendent talent. There was just this sense of you can't relate to Tiger. It was maniacal work ethic and his ruthless excellence. But Phil hitting these crazy ass shots and losing tournaments, it just made him more relatable, more compelling on some levels. So and then there's Phil's a rascal. Like he's a mischief maker. He loves to stir the pot, and he loves to talk trash, and he's always applying the needle, and that's fun too. Like there's a great quote in this book from Charles Barkley and he's one of the few people on the planet who's been close to both Tiger and Phil. And he says, everyone in Tiger's orbit's uptight. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. And he's like under siege. And if you're with Phil, you're just going to have fun. Everybody's smiling and laughing. And like that, there's just more joy around Phil. And that's a pretty fundamental difference.
And Phil would be gambling on the golf course, checking, scores. He used to pick games on my radio show, Alan, years ago. And
I remember that.
He would call them mother-in-law bets, where he would say to his mother-in-law, "You should be betting on these games." And he was actually very good. But you're right, as a former gambler, we only tell you when we win. We don't tell you when we lose. Help me understand. Phil's not in the PGA, not in the Masters. Whose decision do you think that was?
Yeah, it's very nuanced. So after we dropped the excerpt from my book, and Phil got himself in some very hot water, and there was this very strong blowback, partly because, as I said, the sneakiness of subverting the PGA Tour, but also I think he failed to understand that how emotional Saudi Arabia is as an issue. That 15 of the 9/11 hijackers did come from Saudi Arabia. They did just assassinate a Washington Post journalist who was a resident of the United States. Like, they are bad actors on the world stage, and their money is very dirty. And I think Phil just thought he was being this cagey businessman who had some leverage and was trying to cut some deals. And he didn't realize how distasteful Saudi Arabia is to
But
a lot
does
of
he
people.
need money, Alan?
Well, that's one of the fundamental questions in all of this, because we know he's made a fortune in his career, but how much has he kept? When you lose $40 million across 4 years, and again, that's what we know. We don't know what we don't know. There's other things in this book that suggest he's feeling financial pressure. Phil sold his Gulfstream, which was like his fourth child. Everyone was shocked about that. And at the root of his bust up with Jim Mackay, his caddy, was money. That he owed Bones almost $1 million. And why wouldn't he just make him whole? And even the Billy Walters stuff, it comes down to Phil owed Billy Walters money. Instead of just wiring it to him, he did this whole stock transaction that got him in trouble. Like, again, isn't he liquid enough just to pay off his debts? You would just assume he was, but we don't know everything about Phil's finances. We just have snapshots. But when you put them together, it suggests that he might be feeling more financial pressure than we could ever imagine, given what he's earned. But it's not what you make, it's what you keep. So, and that's been one of the fundamental questions in all of this, is why is Phil chasing this Saudi money so hard? And we might have some insight into that through the book. So,
yeah. Well, where do we see Phil surface? Does he play an event? Does he do a sit down interview? What's next for Phil?
Yeah, I mean, there is a playbook, for public figures when they're trying to fight their way back, and you would assume that he would go sit on Oprah's couch, or maybe he'll come on your show, and it would make sense to start telling his side of the story before he shows up at a tournament. But that when Phil put out that public statement in February, it was an absolute word salad. I mean, it read like a midnight tweet storm, and it does not inspire confidence that he has the right people around him to guide him through this very complicated moment. So And Phil's stubborn. I mean, there's another quote in the book from Peter Costas, who was living out in the desert, and him and Phil were friends, and Costas was kind of this low key swing instructor, and he said Phil has always surrounded himself by yes men, and he's never in his life listened to anything from anybody except occasionally from Amy. And so, that's Phil's personality. He's a very double down personality, and you see that on the golf course. The last hole of the U.S. Open at Wingfoot, we want to hit a hero shot when he should have just laid up, and you obviously see it in his betting life. And so now, are we going to see it here? And this first big controversy that's really sidelined him from golf. Is he going to try and double down and prove that he was right, and therefore he is going to go to the Saudis and take their money and go all in with the Saudis, which I think would be a colossal mistake from a public relations standpoint. But if he needs the money, they're offering him into the 9 figures. It's hard to say no to that. But so there's some big things on the horizon as far as the schedule goes. To answer your question, the first Saudi event is in early June, and PGA Tour members, to go play in an overseas event, they have to get a release from the tour. And it's almost like asking your spouse for permission to cheat on them. And the tour said no. And so now it sets up this intrigue, or any tour member is going to defy that edict. And they're going to bust a blockade, and they're going to go over and play in that Saudi event. And if that happens, they're probably going to get suspended, or they almost surely will get suspended. And then it's going to set up a court battle on antitrust. And this could reshape the entire landscape of professional golf. So there is a lot at stake. And I think at one point, Phil was kind of willing to be the first guy out of the foxhole, but now maybe he's waiting to see what these other players are going to do. So he may or may not play that first Saudi event. The next week is the U.S. Open, which we all know is the missing piece in Phil's resume. And he's now back in the field by virtue of his PGA Championship win. So early to mid-June is when Phil's going to have to make a decision. If he sits both of those out, then we know this self-imposed exile could last a long time.
Alan, good luck with the book. Great to talk to you again. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan.
Alan Shipnuck. He's been covering golf for over 25 years. The book is Phil, the Rip-Roaring and Unauthorized Biography of Golf's Most Colorful Superstar, available online wherever books are sold.